the fire happened that burned down the wharf and the dock. And the story was, and this one is true, there was a supply boat, it was called the Petroleum 2, and it was unloading fuel, and right at the end there was a little sheen on the water, there was a leak somewhere, and a purse-seine boat called the Saga from Seattle was pulling into the dock, and by the time it got into the dock, the sheen was all the way around the boat, and there was an explosion. And the whole sheen turned into just a sea of flame. And the crew, the man who owned the boat, he was able to jump off on the dock. The crew, they were below deck, so they came up, they jumped off on the other side of the boat, and they were all horribly burned when they, as they swam to shore. So he bought the store, and the store did not burn down. It was the wharf and the oil dock and the ship. In fact, it said that if it hadn't been a good offshore wind, the whole place would have gone in.
Wow.
So the wind was blowing the right way, I guess, for Ira that day. Anyway, so he owned the store until 1932. My dad, all my dad ever wanted to do was be the proprietor of the Richardson store. The only place my dad ever wanted to live was on Lopez Island. He came with Ira, but his mom wouldn't let him go to school here, so he graduated from high school in Seattle and went to the University of Washington. He went and became a superintendent and high school teacher in Mount St. Helens School District. That's where I met my mom, who went to Bellingham Normal School, 2 years, 20 years old, became first grade teacher. She saw Ira and he was a catch. She told me at one point, she said, you know, Mary Anne, he had the best car of anybody I knew. So they got married in 1931, and then Ira was killed in an automobile accident in 1932. So my mom, at 23 years of age, she'd been married 1 year. Oliver packed her up and said, we're going to Lopez to run the store. And my poor mom, like I said, she really thought she was going to live in that area, in that logging community where her family was. She thought they were going to live there their whole lives. And she said that when she first got to Lopez, she really thought she'd been dropped off in hell. She didn't know anybody. But you know, Lopez embraced her. The people on the island, and the first people she met was Eileen Kilpatrick, Frank and Eileen Kilpatrick. And you have to be a real old-timer to know these people, but they were the salt of the earth, and it was my mom's friend for like 67 years till she died. But Lopez embraced my mom and my dad, and they loved living on the island, and they liked the store. And then World War II came along, and all young men and old men and men in between, where my dad, he was kind of in between, they had to enroll in the service. So he enrolled in the Coast Guard, and he did offshore patrol. The Coast Guard would commandeer yachts and reposition them as Coast Guard vessels. They put him on, he was a second-class boatswain's mate, and he had 3 men that were his crew. They put him on this sailboat. They said, go Seattle, go out to Nia Bay, take a hard left, and just patrol up and down the Washington coast. And that's what he did for 3 years. I asked him one time, I said, what were you looking for? And he said, we were supposed to be looking for German submarines, or Japanese submarines, or airplanes. And he said, basically, all we did was pull drunks off the rocks. Anyway, and my mom, during those years, because she had a teaching degree, even though she'd only taught first grade, she'd done it for 3 years, the school board came and said, Hazel, you need to come and teach school, because all the men, of course, had to go be in the service. So she went and taught 7th and 8th grade for the 3 years while all the men were at war. And she said, Mary Anne, we just muddled through together. It was an interesting time. So my dad, he got out of the service in 1945. My sister Hazel was born in 1947, and now we'll all know how old I am, because I will tell you that I was born in 1950, and Hazel and I grew up in that store. You know, we I spent all my time with Vera and Cliff Lowry up on the corner. They were the salt of the earth. They were the best people that ever lived. And I spent a lot of my time with that guy right over there, with Dick and Julianne and Shelley Jennison and their family. They were my playmates. They loved me even when I was a real brat. I was hoping I hope he'd say that wasn't.
You were not a brat. We enjoyed playing.
But
We
Richardson,
loved her.
Richardson was my world, and I grew up and I learned to, you clerked and you pumped gas and you did all the stuff that you did in the store. And my mom, she really had a feel for that store. She understood that it wasn't just what you needed. Sometimes you had to have what you wanted. There was a birthday or a Christmas present or whatever. And one of my favorite stories was how she stocked these big glass cases that were up on the second floor. I mean, I remember I was a little kid, and this guy, he was the epitome of traveling salesman, and that's what he was. Came in the store about 4:45 one night, and he had the rumpled suit, the hat, the whole big old brown cases. And he said to my mom, somebody convinced me that this was going to be his area. He was going to do the San Juan Islands, and this guy was dejected. He had not sold diddly. And so my mom said, well, we're closing in 15 minutes. And he said, well, I'll go find a room. Well, on Lopez in the winter in 1955, no. So we had to take him home. And he spent the night with us, and my mom cooked him dinner, and then the next day, I remember going down with her, and he opened up these great big brown suitcases, and these were his samples. And it was everything that was wonderful. There were jewelry, there was necklaces and rings and embroidered hankies and comb and brush and mirror sets and little glass figurines and jewelry boxes and china cups, and there were toys. My mom had this little section for toys over. And anyway, so the guy and my mom, it was unbelievable. We thought it was so great. And then he said, well, you have to buy a dozen at a time. She said, no, we only need one. And he said, this guy was desperate. He hadn't sold anything. So he said, well, this is the end of my year. We're going to get new inventory. He said, I'll sell you my samples. So she could buy one of everything. And that's how she stocked those cases up in the store. And that guy came back year after year after year after year, and he stayed with us, and he got to eat my mom's dinner.
We're going to show. Should I get that back this way? We're going to run a couple more pictures here. We'll come back to Mary Anne in a little bit here. You saw a picture the other day, a few back there where, remember I said early on, you see that sign on the storefront? You can see where there, remember what I said, that picture, you recognize that? Go back down here a little bit and you'll see that part of the building, when they took the store apart and moved it down onto the dock, that wall is still there, and it got moved down onto the southern store. One thing I'd like to point out, just roll back one more there, where you would just a second. Just one frame back. See this device here in the middle of the thing? That was a cargo mover. And what they would do, it was a series of pulleys, and it would set on the ship, and you load the cargo onto it. They would crank up those pulleys and come up to the level of the dock, and you could offload the stuff right there, because they did not have ramps, and it would have been really a chore to try to drag anything up. The only other way you could do it would be with booms on the boat. That took up a lot of space, but this thing was really, you could raise animals, all kinds of cargo on and off the boats. And I remember being at Richardson, and it was probably 20 or 30 feet drop at low tide, wasn't it? It was pretty. So that's kind of a neat thing, and you can see some of the older cars here. And this is back probably, I don't know, this is when your grandfather would have been there, or your no, it says 20.
Early 30s, late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah, late 20s. So that your dad was already there then. So let's take a couple more frames here so we can.
Larry, I'd just like to mention that freight elevator was invented by a Barlow, who was from Lopez. They were from this area.
Barlow Bay.
Oh, Sam Barlow, Barlow Bay out here, he's kind of infamous around here.
Harry Barlow.
Pardon me?
Harry Barlow was the inventor.
Harry?
Harry Barlow, yeah. No, I didn't mean Sam was the inventor, I just meant he was the original Barlow that came to Lopez. I heard he jumped ship or something and came in and homesteaded down there, so. I believe that's a very early, is that an old fuel pumping device there?
I think they still have it.
That's one of the early ones that I can remember. I also remember they were on the dock at one time. I don't know if you have any pictures of that we haven't time. See this grin, and we were talking about this today. This is Oliver. This is what you saw on him almost every time you saw him. That expression on his face, that was Oliver. That was what he looked like almost all the time.
Except when he was mad.
Well, fortunately, I never saw him. Except the other time I saw him really with big smiles on his face. He used to come up and hit fly balls for the guys during baseball practice. He loved baseball, and he would come up down. Okay, here we are up to this is after your father left. The Mangs, and I thought they owned it for quite a while. You know, your memory gets messed up over in 50 years. I thought they were there for a while, but apparently it was less than a year that they actually had the store. And you can see, we probably all knew, many of you knew Dan and Florence. They both lived into their mid to late 90s, but this is what they looked like when they first came up to Lopez. We're kind of pushing through these a little bit
So
here.
let Mary Anne tell more
Yeah.
her parents.
Yeah, just go ahead now.
Okay, I won't talk too much because I won't talk too much more, but you have to, everybody who is my vintage knew when I was 12 years old, we went to Anacortes to go to the dentist, and we came home with a big black Labrador retriever. His name was Carl Grand Rip III, and my dad called him Moose. He was huge. He weighed over 100 pounds, and he was chubby, and that's being kind. My dad, there was a butcher shop, and anytime my dad cut meat, he'd throw the dog some steak. I mean, the dog had a 25-pound bag of dog food in the office that he ate at will. And the dog, my hierarchy in the family went right to the devil when we got the dog, because then it was my dad, my mom, the dog, and then I was down here somewhere. And sometimes I really feel that it was my dad, the dog, my mom. the Moose, my dad and that dog, they never did anything without the other one. My dad wasn't real tidy, but he'd throw his coat down in his office, and the dogs sleep on it. And my dad was a Standard Oil distributor, and every day about 2 o'clock, the tank truck would go out. The dog was always with him. And one day, he was in a hurry, and Moose was down in the basement licking out the ice cream cartons. That was his job. And in the big tubs, and so he was licking those out, and so Dad left him. So I watched the dog come up, and he just looked, and that look, and you did not want to make Moose mad. Oh, trust me, you did not want to make Moose mad. I am not making this stuff up. Anyway, so he immediately went in the office and chewed one arm off my dad's coat, and then laid it down gently so the good arm was up, so my dad didn't know there was no arm on it until he put it on. So Dad thought that was probably retribution enough, but it wasn't, because the next day came time to go out on the truck, no dog. Now, Oliver, no dog. So now he's really mad, and he's dog, and off he goes. And I remember, I was for whatever reason, I was going down the ramp, and I saw that truck coming back down the road. And when he went out and delivered the fuel oil, it usually was about 2-3 hours from place to place to place. And it was about 30 minutes after he had left, and you could see all the big hoses were draped all over the top of the tank. And my dad, I just looked, I was terrified. Because my dad was furious, and he came in and he said, the crank, somebody took the crank. The crank was what, you rolled the hoses back on the big spools. And the dog goes out, comes back about 2 minutes later, carries that crank in, and drops it. I swear to you, and it was just like the dog was like, okay, there. And I swear the tank truck never, ever went out again. The dog he was a good-natured dog until you made him mad. Whoever he was mad at in the family, my mom would hang up the clothes and he would go up and just rip their clothes off the line. And he'd take them out in the woods, and if he forgave you, sometimes he'd bring them back, and sometimes you were just out of luck. I mean, the dog, I think the dog was as famous as the Richardson store. I would meet people later in life and they'd say, oh, so you grew up at the place with the big black dog. In fact, and I remember my tourists would come in the summer, and sometimes they'd go in the office and they'd say, oh, I'm looking for the proprietor. Yes, that's me. We'd like to complain because we don't think health regulations, you shouldn't have a dog in the store. And my dad would just look at him and say, but I think you ought to shop somewhere else. Trust me, nobody messed with the dog. And one last story and then I will quit. But my dad got sick in 1971. My dad was a stubborn man. He didn't tell anybody he was sick, but he decided that he needed to sell the store and the boat. So he wouldn't burden my mother with these. And so my husband, I got married in 1970, and he wanted Steve and I to take over the store. And Steve had 3 more years left in his enlistment in the Navy. And the Navy doesn't let you just resign. They kind of insist that, you come every day until you're done. And so it was a real disappointment for him that we wouldn't take over the store, that I wouldn't be the 3rd generation Lundy running that store. But my dad sold the store, and he died within a year. He didn't know he was sick. Mings bought the store, and then Chandler's got it shortly thereafter. And
we also inherited the dog for a while.
well, that was, it was a hard time. Steve was in the Navy and he was deployed, and I kind of lived hither and yon. And finally, when I found it somewhere and I got a job and settled down somewhere, my mom boxed up the dog and sent him over to live with me. And the dog didn't live very much longer, and I really think that it was too much for him. I think that when my dad died, that was a real crushing blow for Moose.
Right.
And then when they took him off Lopez, when my mom laid him, I think it was just too much for him, and I really swear the dog died of a broken heart. Because, I mean, truly, the dog without my dad and my dad without the dog just didn't seem to work out very well. So I grew up at the Richardson store, for which I am very, very grateful. Lopez, Richardson taught me a lot. Taught me about community. My parents, the store was in the family for 56 years.
Wow.
And my mom and my dad, I know, they dedicated their lives to that store and to the community. They wanted the store not just to be a place where you shop, but they wanted it to be the heart of the community. And for that, I am grateful that I got to be part of that, and I'm glad I got to grow up in the Richardson store.
I just wanted to add one thing to that. Oliver and Hazel were so great, they would run tabs for people on the island that couldn't get out, and Oliver would take groceries to the people that ordered them. They call the store and tell them what they need, and then he put it on their tab, and he'd drive out when he was going out with the stove oil in the truck, or heating oil or gasoline to people's places, and he would actually do the shopping for them and bring it to their house. So it worked really well.
I wanted to
I wanted to say too that, the Lundy family sort of acted like a local bank. My grandparents, bought their first tractor through him, and when the war came along and there was no gas and everything, the grandfather went back to horses, they took the tractor back, and after the war, my both grandparents went down and bought the tractor back. And I know that, many of the families paid their store bill once a year, and she was even telling me sometimes it took 2 or 3 years before they could pay it back. But, they carried you, and they supported this community 110% all the time. So then we moved into a little more modern era. That store, you can see, did not change from about the time Oliver remodeled it up until it burned down. It very little changed. My mom worked in that store, and there was a stair going down in the basement, and there was a ramp going up into the other part, and I mean, it was like, what, 3, 4 levels?
Oh, and they made no sense. I mean, because they just, there was like little cubbies and little floors, and it just made no sense, but it was a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, it was like a warren, you know. So let's go on. Anyway, we have the Chandlers took it over, and this is Ted and Connie. Did I say that right? Yeah. Ted and Connie, and they took over from the Mains, and I'll let them speak now for a little bit.
Okay, am I on? Yeah. I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the fishing. You've heard all you can hear about the store because the Lundy's ran it for so many years, but we took over in we bought the store in late '72, took over in the January of '73. That year was a huge year in fishing, and we figured about 600 different fishing boats off that dock in that year. We'd have like 50 boats at a time fueling, and then they fished at night because the nets wouldn't allow them to fish during the daytime. And so they would come in generally in the late afternoon. Up to 300 or 400 boats were anchored in McKay Harbor at the time. So about 5 in the afternoon, it sounded like a freeway. The roar would start, and all the boats would start out to go fishing. Yeah, they all came at the same time. And we ran the store just as a family. We had 3 kids, and the 2 boys were on the dock, and our daughter and Connie were inside running it. We did have help from others from time to time. So the fishing was absolutely incredible. And normally the fishing season, you'd get like a 2 or 3 day opening for 2 or 3 weeks, something like that for the sockeye run. But in 1973, there was a huge run, and they opened for 7 straight days. So needless to say, there were no supplies left in the Richardson store after 7 days. So we had a little runabout, and we would run to Skyline over in Anacortes and get milk and other things in the middle of the night so we'd have something in the store. We serviced a lot of fishermen from Seattle, mostly Norwegians from the Ballard area, as well as the local fishermen, and a lot of Indian tribes. We had 4 major Indian tribes: the Tulalipes, the Swinomish, the Lummi, and the Puyallups.